sure where she is. She said something about, I have to go to Cambodia on assignment.
I did not understand the assignment.
No, I had no clue. You know who else didn't understand the assignment?
Audra did not understand.
Welcome to Coffee Talk with Surge. Mick and I are live in Washington, D.C. for today. Sadly, we will not be joined with our beloved Audra Streetman, who is currently on assignment out of the city. And we'll talk to her in 2 weeks, but she's not going to be here. We have an exciting 20 to 30-minute show today. We're going to be going over some of the recent news around Darknet. We're going to talk about State Department. We're going to talk about Lapsus.
Probably some ransomware again.
I'm going to spring for some shells later on.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah, then we'll do a charity countdown, which is exciting. So thank you for joining us today. And let's go over what we have. So the first bit of news that Audra left us before she departed on assignment was that the German police have shut down $1.3 billion of illegal Darknet firms. So the law enforcement seized server infrastructure, and 543 Bitcoins. Turns out the Russian language Hydra market platform had over 17 million client accounts used for drug trafficking and money laundering. And last year, the German police took down the dark market that had about 500,000 people used to trade drugs and cryptocurrencies. So if I synthesize this down, because our beloved Audra is gone, Germany takes down major dark web sort of thing. Hilarity does not ensue.
I mean,
Mick, your thoughts?
Shout out to the German police. That's amazing work. I think that my biggest takeaway from this was, one, the market's getting shut down. So you have Hydra market and you have dark market both gone.
Yeah.
So if I'm a guy trying to peddle my wares, where do I go next? So I think that's going to be interesting to see.
I heard that Crimea this time of year is lovely.
Is it? I heard the opposite, especially. And the next part is, in the report, it showed ransomware strains. The longevity of them is not quite as long as we thought it was originally.
Correct.
So, with that rapid pace and with these markets getting shut down, what does it look like? I mean, if it's one thing we've learned throughout our careers is that criminals will find a way to criminal. And if you shut down one market, what else will pop up in its place?
I'm interested by the ransomware strain. It's a piece of research we released about 2 weeks ago, a ransomware white paper. Shannon Davis was the primary author, investigator. And one of the big things we found was that ransomware on average is really fast. Like the fastest ransomware sample encrypted 100,000 files in about 4.5 minutes.
Yeah.
We had another, the average I think was something like 35 to 40 minutes for all the different ransomware variants we played with. And some of the research that we're going to go on to this summer is actually about the lifetime of ransomware.
So if we think of a ransomware strain lasting just a few months, right, which is what we're seeing, then those strains will vary ever so slightly, which is likely going to increase that the encryption time, giving defenders less time to respond to it. So again, I'm super curious how that goes. I think the research that the team that Shannon led was ransomware is getting faster.
Ransomware is getting faster. Then there's other aspects that we're looking at that Kelsey Bourne is leading around, like, is ransomware of today the same as 2015 as the same with 2011? And can we do some historical analysis there? So I'm going to be interested to kind of see the real world results of Kelsey and Shannon's research when we compare it to things like what we're seeing here for the Darknet firm.
Yeah, right. I think the overall from this was, if you run an illegal forum on a dark web market, you probably had a bad day.
Yeah, probably a bad person too. I'll just throw that out there. Another bit of news that strikes a little bit literally closer to home where we are today.
It's like right there.
It's a big day for the State Department for U.S. cyber diplomacy. The State Department launched a new Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy, or CDP won't let me be, on Monday with the aim of addressing national security challenges associated with cyberspace and digital policy. The Bureau will eventually be led by a state-confirmed ambassador. The Bureau has 60 staffers, about to go up to 30, so a nice round 90, which is important. You got to align to baseball and all things U.S. politics. The Obama administration first set up the Cyber Coordination Office in 2011, unsurprisingly restructured during the Trump administration, but it was approved, this Bureau, with the Trump presidency, and now Biden is pushing it forward, which is important because, if nothing else, President Biden is doing a lot of cyber stuff, and I think this is the next step. Mick and I have a lot of experience working with the State Department in our previous lives when we had real jobs, not just drinking coffee. And I'm excited by this and the thought that cyber is becoming, we've always talked about cyber as like the fifth domain of warfare. And to be honest, it makes a lot of sense to start putting cyber in policy from a diplomatic corps point of view and what that could mean.
Oh, 100% agree with you. I think it's a fantastic effort State Department's put out. So I guess you can say I'm down with CDP. Okay. Anyway, I think it's a tremendous first effort. They mentioned that it's kind of being an amalgam of existing agencies that are already inside the State Department, but they are going to bring on more talent. So I'm curious to see what comes out of this new group. And I'm hopeful because to your exact point, we've done net defense for a super long time and policy has not quite caught up to the reality of it. And I think those are getting closer and closer now, especially with the new department forming at state. And you mentioned President Biden has done more in cyber in a couple years than we've seen in the couple
which is
terms
impressive
before
because
that.
when he was born, they just had the telegraph.
They did.
So,
they did. It was.
He's a big fan of Telegram. No offense, President Biden. I like this partly because I look at the things going on with negotiations in Russia and Ukraine. I look at the things that we saw with President Biden or Obama and China before.
Right.
And like cyber as a area is an important part for all these discussions because it's often used as a way of escalating without getting to the point of kinetic warfare. And so I think it's essential that we actually have people trained in discussing this to actually go through what that means.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Where you look at something like the 2015 agreement with President Xi and President Obama, hey, we're no longer going to hack things. Economic espionage is still okay. It was just a weird thing. And I think having more of that, more ability to defend via policy, when we look at proportional response, policy needs to play a part of it. And it's weird for me because my entire career, mostly we kind of, shied away from, hey, we need a policy on that. We've never actually wanted to sit and codify it. And now I think it's a tremendous effort to lead that.
Between the things that are going through the Senate, the House, all the subcommittees, the things we're seeing with CISA and Joint Cyber Defense Coalition, now State Department is having its own area.
And I think the NSA has got their cyber collaboration center. It's really, we've seen a lot more of the, hey, we're better together at this. Let's share more. So I'm hopeful that trend continues.
Do you think there's going to be like cyber diplomats to cyber diplomats? Like, will we have a Chinese cyber diplomat kind of talking to the State Department equivalent, like at that level? Are they liaisons? Like, there's liaisons for the DoD to the State Department.
Would it be a red phone or like a red video call or like a Civets? How does that work? But I think you're exactly right. There has to be a counterpart, whoever we're talking with. Otherwise, the language is not going to be the same.
No, it's like when Space Force came out and people kind of laughed. I was actually a huge fan personally, because this is a recognition of a domain of warfare that needs to be a focus, right? And you look at the U.S. Air Force, like the Air Force was part of the Army Air Corps all the way until I think 47 or so. And then they founded the Air Force because they recognized this is a separate domain of warfare. We've sorted that off with, space,
the Navy Marine Corps.
Marine Corps. We made Space Force. There's a lot of discussions that have gone on since we've been in the military and the government around should cyber be its own thing. And I'm not sure if we're there yet, but I do wonder if by making a diplomatic corps focus on it, are we getting that next step?
Right. I think the recognition that cyber as fifth domain, as hokey as that sounds, cyber is a very real thing. And to see that codified as a pillar, I think once you recognize it, more will come from it.
And just like think, it all started with ASL.
It did.
Or sorry, AOL. Mix that up. Same, but different.
It's still same.
Okay. Next item that Audra left us, our beloved Audra, coordinated phishing campaign targeting election officials in 9 states, according to the FBI, which I'm going to be fascinated with your background working in politics and on electoral campaign. Invoice-themed phishing campaigns sought to steal the login credentials to election administrator systems. The emails were sent in batches over 3 days and used to compromise email addresses. It is unclear if these phishing attempts were successful, but the FBI believes adversaries will continue or increase targeting of U.S. election officials. And I think this is a key, right? It's going towards officials who are in charge of the election systems, not campaigns or candidates, with phishing campaigns into the lead up of the 2020 midterm elections. I'm being very careful on that word. So a couple of things here. First off, I love the invoice because the entire time I've been in cyber, invoice.pdf.
It could be a threat actor, or it could be generic business email compromise.
Could be a teenager out of Sussex.
Yeah, it could be any one of those things. So I think that was a very generic, kind of TTP they gave out or that was used. But at the same time, we've seen that be super effective.
Yep.
Like it is that awesome Pokemon that you just roll out and it works super well. I saw this and I was like, oh, it's your dystopian reminder that midterms are coming up. And we saw this at last midterm election was there were state officials getting targeted, but
Now,
these
that
were more
was 20 years
representatives.
ago. I'm kind of confused.
2 years, 20 years, I don't remember. It's
Yeah.
been so long. Could have been 4, could have been 40. But the part where this is an ongoing campaign or believed to be part of an ongoing campaign, I don't think that's going to go away. If we've seen anything, and then again, my time working at the 2020 election attached to the Buttigieg campaign, 2016 actually being at the White House in a threat intelligence role, watching all of this play out, I do see this getting worse. I do see, because of the, I guess, the scrutiny and the platform that election security has been given, and people realizing how important that is, it's going to be an increasing attack vector to just do whatever with, whether that's to try and sway the election, try to damage the credibility, or just to try and burn it down. I think all of those threats are very real possibilities that we'll see this midterm cycle.
Who has authorities over election officials? I mean, the way we do elections, for those of you who are not American, and I apologize because we have such a heavy American bias on so much that we talk about on this show, but elections and electoral officials, I mean, they vary by county and state, national versus county politics versus state politics. Like,
it is nutty. So when you break it down, right, there is the Secretary of State for that state that's in charge of the election process, and there's a bunch of other moving parts behind that.
Now, is that who I call if I want to have my results overturned?
No, I believe that's you have to call a ninja. So first you have to find a ninja, and then
they're hard.
Yeah.
I would look for a cyber one personally.
I heard they're looking as well. So the elections, way they work is basically it's kind of state by state. They vary based on those states' rules. And if you're wondering, hey, why is there no federal oversight? And why isn't there just one rule for all 50 states? You're basically trying to federalize elections. And there's arguments made on either side of that, but every state has their own rights in the way they do things. So putting safeguards in place are the basic things you can do. From this report, we saw it was attempted login credential takeover. All right, what cures that we know of?
MFA.
So put MFA in, patch your stuff. These are the basic hygiene steps that we've been preaching for quite some time. And in the election space, 2016, in my opinion, was not great. 2020, fantastic work by Krebs, the entire crew, just to rebuild that
Bob
trust.
Lord, all the folks over there.
Everyone over there. Doing fantastic work, and to kind of reestablish that we are a technical, credible resource for the election systems out there. And I'm keep an eye on this. I don't think it's over yet, and we've got about a few months till midterm, so we'll see what happens.
Fascinating. Well, with that, we're going to go on to our 60-second challenge. Drew, roll clip. And now, Splunk Cybersecurity 60-second charity challenge. Remember the rules. You've got to get through an entire subject in 60 seconds, or you donate to today's charity of choice. Good luck. Okay, we tried to kill the dings, but the dings will not make us.
I don't know
really
how to
popular.
computer. I don't know how to
computer. He's going to get some advice from
HR.
From HR. That's a whole different matter. Today's charity challenge is why Spring4Shell didn't happen, the rise and fall of the CVE. And our charity today is going to be one supporting the Transgender Day of Visibility, which was very recently. We have a lot of friends and folks impacted by a lot of things going on in the world, and we just want to recognize them and give some money over to folks who can help make a difference in those causes. So for those of you not keeping track at home, Spring4Shell was the most recent little CVE that almost was, right? Yep.
And we kind of thought it was going to be the next Log4Shell.
Could be.
The next solar, and again, it still could be, but it wasn't the fire we all thought it was. So we're kind of going to break down why. And if I remember correctly, Drew, who won last time?
You, Mick?
That's right. So, Ryan, I think you'll kick off today's 60-second challenge.
So wonderful, because I didn't have a great chance to prepare, but I have been pretty heavily involved in Spring4Shell. So, Drew, roll clip, and let's see what I can get out the gate. As remember, the Spring4Shell didn't happen. So, for those of you who have been paying attention or not paying attention, Spring4Shell was yet another Java vulnerability or something along those lines. Java, of course, is made to be your kind of any platform. It is buried and embedded everywhere from the space station to missiles to TVs to laptops to everything. So every time there's a Java vulnerability, it causes the entire world to take a big, deep breath of absolute terror. This was, of course, completely exemplified by the Log4Shell incident, which took over my entire life and many others in the industry. When the first words about Spring4Shell came out, it was a very confusing blog post that I read about 20, 30 times, never fully understood it, but Java equals bad. So we started spinning up things and getting really ready for this. As time went on, it turned out there were 2 different CVEs, 2 different RCEs. No one's 100% sure how they worked. There's some compromise happening. There's a whole bunch of mass scanning, but it turns out it looked to be very difficult. It was also happening during a very busy news cycle. So although CVE could have been bad for Spring4Shell, it kind of fizzled.
Oh, so good. So good. So good.
I'm so going to lose. You have a prepared
document. I wrote things. All right, Drew, you ready to go? All right, so I'm reminded of a line from Locksley Hall, Lord Tennyson's poem about cousin love. In the spring, a young man's fancy turns to thoughts of love. Or in this case, entirely confusing set of exploits that may or may not have been cause for alarm. I'm still not 100% sure, to be honest with you, because as pedantic as the InfoSec is, we're still really bad at communication. So Spring Core versus Spring Cloud, it sounds super confusing because it is. So let's break this down super simple because I'm a simple guy. It's like streaming a DVD or streaming a movie versus watching a DVD. It's the same movie, just a different vehicle. And in one case, the Easter egg was an RCE. So looking at all this, you're going to put out a fire that was logged for Shell a few weeks ago. If you did the patching, you did the updates for that, you're pretty much fine for the most part. But again, this could flare back up. And for those of you hoping that, a thunderbolt would come wiping out Spring RCEs, it didn't happen. So blue teams, do the diligence. It's the same thing, and you're going to be fine.
All right. Since Audra is off on location, Drew, tell me how bad I lost, brother. So Mick lost.
No, you did, Ryan.
No.
That's right. Bring up Locksley Hall. It's always a winner. Always a winner. But hey, folks watching, if you want to chime in and with who you thought won, we'll be watching.
There we go. And just remember, I do the hiring on the team. So with that in mind, we're going to move into our deep dive. Now, I believe that we're having a couple problems with our streaming platform. Normally, we have lots of nice visuals and websites popping up here. So I'm actually going to read out what the hot take it is that we're going to be describing. Now, many of you know, Mick and I are passionate about advocating for people getting into cyber. We do a lot of conferences. We talk a lot about that here. And there was a recent discussion around Lapsus. Now, Lapsus apparently was basically a hacker in a trench coat, just 4 of them stacked up. Turned out
they did a ransomware.
They did a ransomware. That doesn't mean their capabilities weren't strong, but it ended up appearing to be allegedly some teenagers, primarily out of the UK. There's been a lot of discussion on whether also Brazil. Point is, this is still happening. We're not here really to talk about the Lapsus excitement, but we are here to talk about is there's been a lot of discussion around this concept of teenagers who are hacking are the exact sort of people that we should be recruiting into cyber, and that because we have things like, certificates, because we have to have 10 years of experience working in Kubernetes, that if you don't have a CISP, you're not worth breathing in this industry, that we should be looking at alternative places like folks who are criminals. That's definitely one way. So that's going to be the deep take, the hot take, the deep discussion. We're a little bit of an echo chamber in this, so I'm going to try to counter your arguments, and we'll see how this goes, because I think we actually kind of align in the same way.
So the hot take, in case you haven't seen it, and you can search all over LinkedIn, search all over Twitter. I think I posted something on it. It was basically, hey, there's no bachelor's degree, no master's degree, no certifications, and these kids did awesome. And I think that's really, really bad because there's an ethical line. I never went to college. My certifications are pretty much expired for the most part, I think. And the reason I got them is because if you're in DOD, you have to get certified to get a job. So I don't think, that's a prerequisite. The other part is, I think as an ethical line, we can have a big debate on whether hacking computers that don't belong to you is wrong or not. It's another day, and it definitely won't be recorded. But I think a good ethical line is don't try to extort millions of dollars from people.
Okay, let's go back to the first part.
Okay.
So you're what, 57, 58?
158, yes.
You look at, the leather skin, the purse.
Yes, reptilian.
We are currently in Tyson's Corner Galleria Mall. There's a lot of rich people here shopping for purses. Mick was actually abducted twice. It was horrible. But my issue with your statement, if I take the other side, is you came through cyber when there was no, like the only certificate you could get would be a Microsoft certified system engineer.
I think a Novell NetWare cert.
Yeah, I mean, when you went through, it was more like,
it was operations. It was just IT operations.
It was mainframe back when I mean, you was basically like you had to go out to England, you had to go find Turing and ask him to sign a piece of paper.
Like Methuselah gave me a ride back to school. Yeah.
You brought out your abacus. I mean, now I would argue that there's a lot more options. So like us pontificating of how like we didn't need certs when we started, there wasn't even cyber when we started.
So I will again counter. I think the ethical line is super important.
Okay,
Don't attempt to.
I avoided that for the first part.
Okay, so
we'll
certificates. Honestly, I think, and we have a coworker who is going through a lot of certification process now. To me, it's always been, what did you learn from the certification, not the certification itself?
See, I go the other way of I find the certs rarely help, but they create this is how high you have to be according to the HR framework that exists in the world.
Right. And I think
the positive unlocked,
the HR framework is broken.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't disagree with that.
I, for one, love HR.
Well, I think the HR, not gatekeeping, it's, if you want DoD, same thing. I think it was the 8570. Now it's a DoD 8140 or something like that. If you want to be a level 1 analyst, you have a security plus. You want to be a level 2 analyst, you've got your GCIA, GCIH. Level 3, it's your CISSP. And those were standards for quite some time.
If you're trying to have, like, we posted a job advert, had hundreds of folks apply. And if you're looking at, and once again, I'm arguing about things I agree or disagree, but I think there's validity on both sides of the certificate argument. And one of which is, like, the certificate says they've done X amount verified by a third party.
Right.
Right. And it doesn't mean you can do the job, but minimally it means
you pass the test.
And there are exceptions to that. CCIE, I think, is a fantastic exam.
Oh my gosh.
OSCP. There's a couple out there that they usually have a practical.
Yes.
Like, for example, there's a wonderful Splunk exam. I think it's a Splunk architect, Drew, keep me honest, that has a hands-on lab section.
Right.
Those tend to be a very good application to knowledge. If it's rote memorization and you have to be gifted at rote memorization, then you can take a
you
security
do fantastic.
plus.
You are going to pass a CISSP. Yeah, 100%. But I think that shows a baseline of knowledge. But during an interview process, in conversation with you, and not like a stump the chump interview, but I think in a conversation with you, I can gauge your technical ability and where you might fall down or where you would excel at.
Would you also agree, however, there are not a significant number of university programs that effectively train folks to come out of college and immediately start doing incident response or compliance, or I think they do a perfectly fine job training folks to be a AppSec developer, but not necessarily, unless you're in a very specialized program. For the most part, they prepare you with, like, this is C shell programming or C programming, but not like this is how you run an incident response with back end of this, like whatever it be. So what's nice there is historically you have not had to have a college degree to get into cyber. Like, you can actually use certs on your own time and much cheaper to actually get that, right? But the idea is the same. It says you're this high.
Right. I agree. Like, that's the bar I grew up with, right? So I don't see anything wrong with it, but at the same time, I see tons of things wrong with it. Hey, this is the benchmark we use. Awesome. But until we have a better benchmark, I just can't think of one, because without those certification benchmarks, it's a very individual process each time. And I don't think that scales. And that's kind of the reason why those were put in place.
Well, and like in the academic world, it takes a lot longer than 6 months to create a new syllabus and lesson plan, right? So one of the advantages for a certificate is you can actually have that out in weeks or months versus waiting for 2 or 3 years for the next round of academia. Let's go on to one of the other things they brought up, experience. So this one, I think I can't say this one enough, right? Like, how much I disagree with this concept. Like, you'll see these apocryphal job postings that say 10 years of Kubernetes required. And of course, Kubernetes hasn't been out for 10 years.
I think one of the reasons why I came to work here, and again, we've known each other for a super long time, but it's because of that ethos that you have. When you posted a position for Surge, the most recent one, like, hey, I don't want you to have any experience. Just
Well, I have a hard time, right? Like I could have someone who's done 20 years of experience. Like I started off with Novell, Windows NT 4.0, Exchange 5.5. None of that is relevant today. I would argue that someone who's been working in incident response for 1 year has more relevant experience than I do in that area today, because I haven't worked in incident response for 1 year, even though I may have done IR for 15 years beforehand. So my concept comes around for a lot of things is you're using experience in lieu of actually talking to someone, and you're just assuming, hey, if they worked on that for 5 years, they must know what they're talking about. I disagree. I don't think that's always the case. And someone coming out of college who worked for 2 years in Kubernetes could be a world expert in it. They don't need to have 10 years, which is also, by the way, impossible.
So my counter to that is, how do you adopt a system to gauge and measure that ability and talent at scale?
I don't know. I know some places do standardized testing upon application, right? I think that's easier for like developer jobs, right? You can say we want someone who's super competent with C or Python or Go, and there's organizations provide like a test where you can go through that and say, hey, you need to do this. Or some places do take-home tests where you have to say do X and come back with Y. Like in the world of cyber, where it goes from everything to incident response and app and DevSecOps to policy, procedure, and education, like I don't know where you get that.
So would you put, and one of the comments just made me think of it, would you put aspects of cyber in a vocational role?
Yes, most of it, to be honest.
And would that change the requirements?
I think it already is, right? I mean, is a certificate that much different than a CDL license? Or, I mean, the way that we teach cyber is often via apprenticeship. There's white papers from anthropologists who talk about the way that most people learn cybersecurity is via YouTube. Informal apprenticeships. If you look at journeymen and apprenticeships in trade industries, that's no different. Like a plumber who goes through that, they're usually in an apprentice or a journeyman organization. I would argue that's still the most effective way today to teach someone the ins and outs of blue team work, for example. I'm not saying it's the best way forward, but it seems to be the most effective today.
So to the last point of this whole hot take that's floating around, they did have a willingness to learn and drive.
Yes.
I don't disagree. I think there are thousands of better examples of that. But my final point was still, they attempted to extort millions of dollars from people. And I don't know how
youthful
that's
shenanigans, Mick.
No, I was a youthful shenanigan.
You just weren't as effective.
I was pretty effective, but I didn't try to extort millions of dollars from people. And I think, and again, that's my line. It's not trying to make it anyone else's line, but I think it's a pretty universal, like, hey, don't steal millions of dollars from corporations.
I do wonder how much of it, though, is just lack of understanding of, like, is this an area where, because abstracted, right? You're at home, you're doing these things on the internet, there's no real sense of,
100%.
Right? Like, it's not like, I think, it's not like they walked into an office or a construction site and stole 400 pounds of copper tubing and then went down and sold for scrap metal and then we're surprised. Right? This is easy to do. Would you download a car, Mick?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I would too, actually. Sorry, Ford.
Tesla.
I think it just kind of, it changes people's mentality, and if you're sucked into that.
But again, I think it's that I don't think, and this is just me, I don't think it's my job as a cybersecurity professional to teach you that level of ethics to not try and extort millions of dollars from people. And I think that's where the argument falls down when you're using Lapsus as a comparison point.
I blame the public education system.
I mean, you can blame that for a lot of things. I don't think these yahoos at any, no, I don't think those are separate. I think you can have a bad public education system and still not learn that simple lesson.
I am in fact joking. Mick never graduated high school, so he doesn't.
Not that
there's anything wrong with either of those. Made my best friends. Going back to this wonderful thing about cyber is you get a very diverse background from very different educational areas.
Yeah.
So, well, we haven't solved anything.
But we've talked a lot.
We've talked a lot.
What we got? 2 Tuesdays. We'll be back. What have you got coming up for the next couple of weeks?
So we have a lot of fun things happening. First off is we're going to be at RSA. Not 100% sure all the things we're doing there yet, but Mick and I and the rest of Certs, for the most part, will be at RSA. We have more ransomware research coming out of Certs from Shannon. Stay tuned for that, but we'll be talking about that in a couple of weeks. We have a webinar coming up with Shannon or others around ransomware work.
You and I are doing a ransomware
We're doing
webinar.
a ransomware webinar.
I'm hanging out with the folks at CompTIA, doing a threat intel webinar. keynoting B-Sides Charm the end of this month.
Yep.
And ThruntCon's coming up. It's been
Marcus LaFerrera and I were and Haley Mills were just at AttackCon last week. You can actually go watch those.
Fantastic talk by Haley.
Haley especially.
It's amazing.
If you're not familiar with RBA, or as some folks call it, rules-based analytics. Rules, I think. Drew, what is it again? I always forget.
Risk-based alerting. Thank you.
There we go.
There it is.
Thank you, Drew. This guy. She just gave a phenomenal talk on it. It's a non-vendory talk. We use Splunk to paint the canvas, but it really changes a lot of people's mentality. I think she actually gave one of the most, like, I am obviously biased, but I think she gave one of the best talks at the conference. She was referenced all the way through, which was really great.
I think it's really fantastic when you look at RBA as a mindset to change. Like, we grew up in the, oh, look, that's red, or at least my approximation of red, time to make a ticket, right? Yep. And now you can't do that just because the volume of alerting that,
and you're missing things that could
much.
Be huge.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so it's a fantastic talk. Go ahead and check it out. And I think it's really, really great. So
we got .conf coming up in a couple months, like 90 days.
Oh my goodness! So the week after RSA is Conf, and we'll definitely be there hanging out. Surge, I think we've got some cool stuff planned that
7
week.
or 8 talks that week.
So if you want any updates, the Surge mailing list, I think Drew throw a link down in the chat. We'll be able to give you updates from that.
We're going to be talking to the Splunk threat research team as well.
Oh, yeah.
So Jose's team, someone from there, we're going to talk. We're going to have coffee talk with Kovar, and we're going to really discuss, Surge has been focusing on the speed of encryption, but they've just done a great job over the last year or two around detecting ransomware. And they've also released some interesting blogs lately on some of the wipers coming out of the conflict recently occurring in Russia, Ukraine. So with that, I think we're going to close it up. We'll be back in 2 weeks.
2 Tuesdays.
And
we'll be
Audra will hopefully be returning from her assignment. Otherwise, Drew, take us away.
Good one.
Thank you.
One.